So it's 3 o'clock in Switzerland now. My name is Peter Ventevogel, and I'm Senior Mental Health Officer with UNHCR, the refugee agency, and I will be the moderator of this webinar. Very happy to do that. We will start in a few minutes, giving some people the time to attend. We have attendance from quite a lot of different parts of the world, including areas where it's likely to be difficult to connect. I see various people from northern Uganda, and I see also, if I'm not wrong, Heide Rieder, who is actually based in South Sudan with IOM, but maybe you can introduce yourself in the chat box as well. And we know that from South Sudan, in some areas, it's difficult to connect. We had invited someone from WHO in Juba, but due to connection problems, he could not attend. So we will not have a discussant today, but we will have 3 great presenters, and I will soon formally introduce them. But they are from 3 organizations: Ken Carswell from WHO in Geneva, Safina Yusuf from HealthRight in Arua, Uganda, and Wietse Tol from Johns Hopkins University and HealthRight in Denmark. I see the chat box already getting new messages. So yes, Heide Rieder, welcome. You are calling in from South Sudan. That's really great, working with IOM there. And I see people from different parts of the world, from Sweden, from Ethiopia. That's also very good. I see a colleague, Solomon, working in Gambela in Ethiopia, which is interesting because Gambela is one of the places around South Sudan with a very high number of refugees from South Sudan. So I would be very interested to hear from Solomon later what he thinks about the Self-Help Plus method that we will discuss in this webinar. So welcome to you all. I also see Ruma from Bangladesh. That's great. Welcome to you. And Peter from Bangladesh, Peter Yuk. So we have also a good participation from Cox's Bazar, which is great, the other part of the world. And I see Siobhan Kaltenbacher, who's with UNHCR in Kampala. Welcome to you as well. I will move on now to introduce the speakers. Welcome to you all to the webinar, Self-Help Plus, an effective and scalable tool to reduce distress among South Sudanese refugees. Question mark. The question mark is important because actually Self-Help Plus is one in a range of scalable psychological interventions that has been developed by the World Health Organization and others. And Self-Help Plus is one of the latest additions to the growing family of scalable psychological interventions, and one that is still being researched. This webinar will focus on one of the research sites, namely northern Uganda, where research around Self-Help Plus has been done for South Sudanese refugees. There's other research going on. Ken Carswell will say more about that. But this research will focus on what we have learned till now around Self-Help Plus for South Sudanese refugees in Uganda. So it's 4 minutes past the scheduled starting time, so I will start now. I have started now, actually. Welcome to you all. For those people who just arrived, please introduce yourself in the chat box, where you are, where you're based, and what organization you're working with. My name is Peter Ventevogel. I will soon introduce Ken now, but just one thing, I want all of you to know the function to use your hand, to raise your hand. You see now that one person raised his hand. That was me, and I would like to. You can see on the bottom of the screen, you can see the little person raising a hand. Can you all click on it just to see whether it works? Yes, 3 people have found them. be more. Could you all do that? Yes, 27. Now we're talking. So that's great. I want to do a very short test before we start. Who of you in the audience has worked with scalable psychological interventions, such as problem management plus interpersonal therapy or other scalable psychological interventions? Could you please raise your hand if you have done that? That's 24, so that's about half of the people here. Then I would like to know who of you has actually worked with refugees in general. That's also slightly less, about 20. Then I would like to know who of you has worked with refugees from South Sudan or with people in South Sudan. So who has a regional experience about South Sudanese people? Please raise your hand if you have. That's really good. That's also 20, 24 people. So that means we have quite a lot of experts in the group, and I hope for a good discussion. I will now stop talking and give the floor to the first speaker, Ken Carswell, who is a technical officer with WHO in Geneva. Ken, are you ready? I don't hear you yet, so can you?
Yeah, hi Peter, can you hear me now? Hi, hi everybody.
We can hear you very well. Ken works with the World Health Organization in Geneva as one of the technical officers, and he is focused on the various scalable psychological interventions, in particular Self-Help Plus. So I give the floor to you. Ken will introduce Self-Help Plus, what it is. After that, we will go to Safina Yusuf, who's based in Arua in Uganda, who will share with us how it was to implement Self-Help Plus. Then we go to Wietse Tol, who will share some of the results of the research that has been done there. And then the floor is open for discussion. So, Ken, over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And thanks, everybody, for coming today. So as Peter explained, I'm going to be talking, doing the first presentation on Self-Help Plus to try and give everybody here a bit of an introduction to it. Now, I think some of you might already be familiar with it, but I'm going to start from the beginning, explain a little bit about why we developed it and how, and then move on from there. And if there's time, also try and give you a little bit of a demonstration of how it works. Okay, so first of all, why was self-help developed? I mean, I think as we all know, there are very large mental health and psychosocial needs globally, but we know there's limited access to effective MHPSS support, and obviously, again, as we know, a very large treatment gap. When we come to sort of humanitarian contexts, these issues might be even greater. So we might find that there's even larger amounts of problems that people face. There may also be limited access to actually deliver the support, and also limited access to train and supervise people. So at WHO, we were keen to develop something to address these problems, partly because the psychological interventions and guided self-help are both recommended by WHO. Okay, so we aimed to develop something that involved guided self-help and that could address the challenges that I mentioned. We also wanted it to be transdiagnostic, similarly to some of our other interventions, such as PM+, and that means that one intervention can be used for many problems, such as depression, anxiety, grief, and loss. And we also wanted it to be relevant and useful for many populations, so that we didn't have to sort of develop something for this subpopulation and something else for another subpopulation, but something that might be suitable for many people who have experienced adversity. We also wanted the package to be feasible for non-specialists to learn, and feasible to implement and scale up and integrate into other existing services. So to do that, we took a bit of a different approach to some of the other packages we've developed before. Now, if we think about scalable interventions or psychological interventions in general, we can think about them in terms of the amount of resources that they need to run. On the left of this, we have lower resource interventions, the lowest one being an unguided self-help book, so just handing out self-help books to people, which we know works in terms of the evidence, and that this can be an effective intervention with a small effect, but it can work. Then up at the other end, we have specialist delivered interventions. And we could sort of see things like SIR, PM+, other psychological interventions sitting somewhere along this continuum. And I'd say that Self-Help Plus is just about here on the graph. So it's sort of guided self-help in a group format. So it's a little bit less than Group PM+, but more than just handing out a self-help book. Okay, now Self-Help Plus is developed and is based on a form of cognitive behavioral therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And ACT uses an approach which involves mindfulness and paying attention to the present moment, and also what we call values-based action. So helping people to live their life, to act and behave in a certain way that follows their important values. So for example, if a value is being kind to someone and to yourself and others, then the idea would be that you can act in that way, that you can be kind to others, even if in a very difficult situation, you can still find small ways to be kind. And we know that these sorts of actions can help people's mental health and certainly help things like depression and anxiety. So Self-Help Plus was developed by experts in this approach and was extensively peer reviewed by many others. And that there were several different organizations involved in the initial funding, both of the development of the package, and that involved WHO Syria, because we developed it first of all for with help from the Syria office and for Syrian people. And then the South Sudanese version we developed using some other support from other funding sources, which Wietse will talk more about the research that we did there. So the format of Self-Help Plus. So the whole idea of Self-Help Plus is to help people to learn skills to help them to manage stress. So it's very much about self-help, about people being able to use these skills, use these approaches to help themselves. The format of it is a large group, so up to 30 people at a time. And we did that so that we could hopefully reach more people with fewer resources. The course can be run anywhere that there's a large space, and also an audio, because the course is audio recorded, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But the audio speaker in Uganda during the trials, we used portable audio speakers, so big battery operated Bluetooth speakers. So I suppose also there needs to be electricity in order to run the intervention, or at least somewhere to charge the speakers. So it's 5 sessions over 5 weeks generally, using a pre-recorded audio. Now this audio is almost like an audio presentation, a bit like a radio program, that talks through what stress is, tells you the sorts of exercises that might help you with stress, why people become stressed. It then has mindfulness and stress reduction exercises in there. And the group will follow through, listen to this audio and follow through it. It's facilitated, and the role of the facilitator is actually hugely important, because it could obviously get a little bit dull sometimes, maybe just listening to an audio. So the role of the facilitator is to really engage the group, make sure they understand it, make sure that they're able to take part in discussions. And the facilitator, there's also places in the audio where the facilitator will run some brief discussions with the group. So although it might sound quite dry when it's explained, I think the groups actually have more life to them than it might sound. Now, alongside the audio sessions, there is also an illustrated book, and this was designed for low literacy populations. And the aim of it is to reinforce key concepts. But the book isn't necessary. So, for example, in areas where reading might be an issue, it's not an essential part of the course. It can still be used, and the course can still be used without the book. So the audio itself could be used alone. And the format of Self-Help Plus. So we have it currently released and available in Juba Arabic. Now, this was the Juba Arabic version was adapted and developed in northern Uganda with the help of South Sudanese refugees living there. And that's the package that we have available. We also have other language packages. We have it in Arabic, and we're also doing further research around other versions of it in Urdu and in Dari. And we've also got a version now where we're using it with people from Nigeria. And this is part of another research project to do with Self-Help Plus in Europe. But for now, the package that we have available is the Juba Arabic one. Now, in terms of who facilitates Self-Help Plus, generally community workers, lay workers, the types of people who would facilitate PM Plus or other interventions like that. But it can also be used by other more experienced individuals. And as I said before, the facilitator's main role is to organize the group, make sure people feel supported, make sure they're engaged, ensure safety and things like that. Supervision in Self-Help Plus is provided by an MHPSS supervisor. Okay, and here's a little picture of it being implemented in northern Uganda. This was during one of the pilots, and we had a school available. So this is why everybody's sitting in benches like this. But generally, if we have a group, maybe people might be sitting in circles or something similar to that. Okay. So just a little bit now about the sessions and the skills that are learned. So Self-Help Plus takes part over 5 weekly sessions, and these are the 5 core skills that we learn during that time. We start off with grounding, which is a form of mindfulness and stress reduction, which focuses on the present moment. And the course takes people through how to do that and how to practice that. The second skill is what we call unhooking. So when you get a difficult thought or an anxious thought, how do you deal with that thought? How do you unhook from it? The third one is about doing what matters. So this is how you might act on your values. The fourth one is about being kind. So really this is about developing social support and being kind to yourself and being kind to others. And the fifth skill is around making room, which is another way of what we call making room or addressing any difficult, stressful feelings or thoughts that you might have. And there's a lot of practice each week. So each week a new skill is introduced, and each week there's extensive practice around that and around the skills from the previous week. So if somebody misses a session, then hopefully they can catch up the next week. Okay. And here's an excerpt from the audio. So here say something like, next time you're hooked by your thoughts and feelings and not really paying attention to whatever you're doing, try to engage in whatever it is you are doing and notice what happens. And here we have 2 questions, so I'm seeing these things popping up, so that's why I said questions there. But we have 2 images here. The first one is the man being hooked by a difficult thought or feeling, and the second one is him unhooking and being able to engage more in the activities he's doing there. And here's some more little excerpts from the self-help book. On the left here, we have it explains the difference between acting towards your values. So again, if your value is family or being kind, you might go this way to the right. But you can also, when you get stressed, act away from your values. And here on the left, we have an image where the person's fighting and getting into arguments. And you can see here we have a narrator character who explains a lot of the core concepts in the book. Okay, so just very briefly, in terms of the South Sudanese version, we recently did a training of trainers in South Sudan with both the Ministry of Health and some key MHPSS stakeholders. And this was really a first time of us trying to train up people outside of a research context. So it was a very useful, I think, thing for us and hopefully for the people who attended. We're doing this MHPSS.net seminar today. And then we're going to be looking to do further training and capacity building in South Sudan. And as I mentioned, the Juba Arabic version is available, and it's available for use on request from WHO. And I'll just leave this up. So if anybody wants any more information about it, these are my contact details. And that's my presentation. Now, if there's just a minute or so more, I would like to just play you a little excerpt from a version of Self-Help Plus, just so you can get a little feel for what it feels like. So this is one of the grounding exercises and should give you a brief introduction into what the course is like. So I'll just try and do this now through my computer. Okay, so hopefully you're all going to be able to hear this.
Please do this exercise in silence. We invite you to sit straight. You might wish to close your eyes to help move more deeply into the exercise. If you do not want to close your eyes, then fix your gaze on the spot. Take a moment to notice what you are thinking and how you are feeling right now. Next, find a way to slow down. Slow your breathing. Breathe in and out through your nose. Empty your lungs completely and then let them refill as slowly as possible. Slowly press your feet into the floor. Slowly stretch your arms, or if you prefer, press your hands firmly together.
Okay, and I'll just stop it there just because of time, but that should hopefully give people a little introduction into the actual audio behind Self-Help Plus and how it might feel to people to actually do the exercise. So I think that's pretty much my presentation over there, Peter. So back over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Ken. I was trying to do the exercise and I get very relaxed now, so it does work to some extent. Thank you very much. I can imagine there are many questions for Ken. You can ask them, but do so by typing it in the chat box. And our team of MHPSS.net will collect the questions so I can read them out. Due to the technicalities of this webinar system, not everyone can talk, but you can participate by typing your questions in the chat box. So please do so. Well, thank you very much, Ken. I have lots of questions, but I will keep myself my mouth closed, because we are going now to Safina Yusuf, who is working with HealthRight International and is based in Arua. And after her presentation, we will go to Wietse Tol, who is also lined up, also with HealthRight International and is based in Denmark. But we first go to Safina. Now, Safina is based in Arua in the north of Uganda. And what I understand is the internet connection is not very good at the moment. Safina, are you there? Safina, can you hear me? Try to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I am.
And
hello, everyone.
That is great. Hello. Safina, I know the connection is not good, but
yes,
could you try to switch the video on briefly so that
hello.
we can
you
actually see your face for a few seconds? So I see something is happening there. Safina, are you adding the video now? Yes. Yes, there you are. Hi, Safina. I can see you very well. Nice to meet you. Welcome here. You can soon switch off, but perhaps you can very briefly present yourself to the audience, and then due to the technical aspects, you can put the video off. So can you briefly introduce yourself, Safina?
Hello, everyone. This is Safina Yusuf, based in Arua. Yes, Peter.
That's great. Yes, no, I think it's good to switch the video off because it makes the connection slow. But we have seen you, and we are very happy. Yes. So, Safina, you're a social worker with HealthRight International, and you're based in Arua, which is in the northwest of Uganda. And you did your work in a rhino camp. Now, a rhino camp sounds very exotic, as if it is a kind of holiday destination with some tents in an area with all kinds of nice African animals. But in fact, it's something very different. Could you explain a little bit what rhino camp actually is?
Yeah, Rhino Camp Refugee Settlement is a refugee camp in Arua district in the northwestern part of Uganda. It is a large settlement characterized with South Sudanese refugees, children, and a few men and elderly people.
Yeah. Do you know how many people are living in rhino camp?
I don't have an exact figure at the moment, but close to 100,000 people are settled in there.
Yeah. Can you repeat the figure? I just couldn't hear. Close to?
Yeah, close to 100,000 people.
Exactly. Yes, so that's really one of the larger refugee camps in Africa. So thank you very much. Now, you have been involved in an implementation research project with Self-Help Plus. Can you tell a little bit about how it was to implement Self-Help Plus? And for example, explain to the audience some things that went well when you were implementing Self-Help Plus in the Rhino camp.
First of all, one of the things which went well was that the South Sudanese women really liked Self-Help Plus, because Self-Help Plus is a simple course where you just sit and listen and then share a few discussion questions. They really liked it, and to them it was their first time, and it was really exciting and interesting for them. Another thing that went well was that the women really easily understood the course, and you could tell that during the discussions they were really engaged, and they would actively discuss and share out how excited they are. Thirdly, Self-Help Plus equipped the South Sudanese in Rhino Camp with long-lasting skills on how to deal with distress whenever they are hooked, and at any time they wished to use it, it was just available for them. So that bit, they loved it.
Okay, that is very nice to hear, and very encouraging to hear as well from someone who has actually worked with many groups. Because I think you were a facilitator yourself and later also involved in the research. Is that correct?
Sorry, my internet had gone off. Could you please repeat the question, Peter?
Yes, I will repeat the question. So this is really great to hear from you as someone who has been involved in the implementation. If I'm not wrong, you have been a group facilitator yourself before you got into the research project. Is that correct?
Yes, please.
So that's really great. Now, I assume it wasn't all 100% fine. So could you also mention a few challenges that you faced while implementing Self-Help Plus in Rhino Camp? I am not sure we still have Safina with us because I don't see her anymore. My apologies to the audience, but we really wanted to have someone based in Uganda to be in this webinar, but it does have some challenges. And I see Safina is back. Safina, can you hear me?
Sorry.
That's okay. I just explained that these are the realities of the field. Now, you explained some of the things that went well. Could you also explain us what the challenges were that you faced while doing Self-Help Plus in Rhino Camp?
Yeah, one of the challenges we faced was delayment in food rations distributed to the refugees and far away located health centers. As a result of that, some participants were not able to attend all the 5 sessions because they have to go and look for alternatives to give their children and themselves. Some have to really walk a long distance to go and access treatment in the health centers. So that really hindered full attendance. Another challenge was that Rhino Camp did not have enough equipment like shelter to help run the course. You know, Self-Help Plus is a group-based course where you have to sit with 25 to 30 people. And in Rhino Camp, there are few classrooms or shelters in which we could do these sessions. So as a result of that, the facilitators had to move all the time with tents and chairs to create a venue to facilitate sessions. And the tents are usually disturbed by heavy winds or sometimes rain. So that was very challenging. Another challenge was that the facilitators were based in Arua and they had to travel every time there's a session from Arua town to Rhino Camp, which involves moving in at times bad roads, and they reach the session venues lately. So that makes the sessions at times begin late and also end late.
Yeah, that is interesting what you say, Safina, because it seems like very simple. You only need a classroom, you only need some electricity, but those basic things are actually not always so easy to realize when people are actually struggling to get food and healthcare. So thank you for explaining these challenges.
Yep.
Now, as we said before, you actually did self-help groups, you as a facilitator. And
Yep.
I just wonder, as Ken said, it is not psychotherapy. The facilitator is not, let's say, a counselor as such. So I just wonder, how hard or how easy is it for a facilitator to run Self-Help Plus? Could you explain a little bit about that to the audience?
Yes. Self-Help Plus at the first time can be a little confusing to facilitate because as a facilitator, you have to deal with the audio, a manual, and a timer all at the same time. So if you're still new to it, it can be a little bit confusing. you find that a facilitator can end up pausing an audio and forgetting to restart, or playing it for a longer time, or such things. But then facilitating or running an SH Plus group is interesting and fun when you really get familiar to the concept and how to do it, because the role of a facilitator is basically to sit and follow with the audio, and then watch the group at sometimes, and then run discussions based on the instructions given by the audio. So it's really fun and easy to do it once you're familiar to the concept. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
So it's easy to do. You have to familiarize yourself a little bit with the materials you say, but it's not counseling as such. But then I just want to know from you, like, it's not a counselor or a psychotherapist, it's a facilitator. But what then are the skills that a self-help plus facilitator needs to have? Can you say a bit about that?
Yeah, a few basic skills that a facilitator needs to have. One is the skill of creating an inclusive environment. Because you're dealing with a group, you have to make everybody feel at home, feel free to speak, and feel included in the whole thing. And another one is to have the skill of communicating clear guidelines. Because before you start off a session or a course, you should put down clear guidelines so you don't go astray, or participants also don't end up disrupting the sessions. Then you should also have group management skills, because you're dealing with a group of 25 to 30. So where there are interruptions and disruptions, you should know how to manage the group. Then to be a good facilitator, you should have a skill of active listening, because you're dealing with an audio which gives instructions, and if you're not keen in listening, you might skip instructions and end up missing the group, or maybe forgetting a few things. Another one last skill. Okay. One last skill you should have is empathy and showing acknowledgement while dealing with highly distressed participants, because SH Plus is a course that handles distressed people. So when they are explaining things to you, you should acknowledge their stories and also show empathy by a way of responding, or sign languages that you use. Yeah,
that was great. Thank you very much, Safina, for this. My last question, because we are running a little bit out of time now, is I just wonder, it's a very scalable intervention, because you have 30 people in a group and you don't need psychotherapists to run the group, but still, the session itself is quite long. It can be up to 2 hours. So I just wonder, how do you do that? Is that not boring for people to be 2 hours in?
Yes, indeed, it's not easy to sit for 2 hours, but given my experience in running groups, I've witnessed that participants are usually very engaged in the beginnings of sessions, during discussions, and then during the 20-second stretches which come in between of the audios, and during such moments, and during the break times, they are really very active during those times. And then some participants get a little bored as the session goes on, because you have to sit properly and listen to the audio. Sometimes it gets a little boring. Some people nap or take short sleeps which is okay. We really don't interrupt them or wake them up, because we are dealing with distressed people. Sometimes they get hooked by their thoughts and feelings, so it's just okay. Basically, that is it. Sometimes they are engaged, and then as the audio goes on, it's normal. They get a little bored, but then most of them also come back.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Safina. I thank you a lot for your explanation, your honesty, and your wisdom. So that was great. I'm pretty sure there are many questions for you. The audience has to wait a little bit. Type your questions in the chat box, and the MHPSS.net team will channel them to me and then to the facilitator. So thank you very much, Safina. Bye-bye. Stay on the line, because there will be questions for you.
Okay, please.
We will be moving to Safina's colleague now, Wietse Tol, who's also with HealthRight International, but also with Johns Hopkins University in the US. And he will explain us more about the research that they were doing, and actually giving us a kind of sneak preview into the results, because actually the results haven't all been published yet, but we will try to get some answers out of him. Wietse, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and thanks for a reminder that that we should be a little bit careful with explaining too much of the results. But yeah, more importantly, I don't want to make this a very long presentation. I want to give you a broad overview of our findings so far. But also to note that the findings are under review for peer-reviewed publication, and in response to peer-reviewed feedback, some things may still change. So I'm presenting preliminary results. And I would like to do that really quickly, because I think for today we had decided the focus would be on the practical aspects, but I'm happy to say more during question time. I would like to do three things really. One is to give you a very brief overview of the research process more broadly, not just the evaluation results, but the research that we conducted overall. Then give you an overview of the how we conducted the randomized controlled trial specifically, and then show you the findings. So just as a series of steps, and I'm not going to explain every detail of the step, every step in detail. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we didn't just rush to a randomized controlled trial, but that we first did a needs assessment that was mainly qualitative in nature, that we then spent quite a bit of time adapting SH+, the English version, to this particular context. And those pieces of the research puzzle have been published in the meantime. After the adaptation, we did a first tryout with just two groups, and a pre-test and a post-test, and more qualitative research to understand how the refugee women were experiencing the intervention as part of a first tryout. Then we did a more complicated, this is step 4, we did a more complicated cluster randomized trial, which was, let's say, a trial run of the full study. We did a small version of the full study just to check whether all of our methods and our protocols were working as we were hoping they were. We did make some changes in that step, so I'm glad we did that. And then at step 5, we did a fully powered cluster randomized trial. I will explain what that means in a second. And again, after the trial, we did more qualitative research. So it's really a mixed methods study in which we used both number-oriented research methods and research methods that are qualitative. So research methods that were focused more on learning from participants about their own perspectives. All right, so I want to take you step by step through the cluster randomized trial. Let me start with the first step. We had a list of villages, of 22 villages in the Rhino Camp settlement, and we knew from our own calculations that we wanted to include 14 villages in Italy to have enough participants to make sure that we could give a solid answer to the question of whether SH+ was working or not. So we randomized 14 out of 22 villages randomly on a one-to-one basis either to a self-help plus condition or a control condition. But first, after randomization, we went to the different villages and we screened random households inside of the villages. What we found is that we actually included almost everybody. So we screened using a quick 6 question screener, the Kessler 6, and we screened in on the basis of moderate distress. And we found that more than 99% of the women actually screened in on the basis of that cutoff. Doing those procedures, we ended up with 7 villages with 331 women who did SH+, and 7 villages also, but with 363 women in a control condition. After the baseline assessment, we did SH+ and enhanced usual care in the treatment condition, and only enhanced usual care in the control condition. What we found, as Safina already said, is that we found high levels for participation. There was an enthusiastic participation. On average, 83% of the women was in each of the sessions. After the 5 sessions of SH+ were finished, we did another assessment to see how scores from before SH+ had changed. Of course, we lost a few women at that point in time because usually because women had moved to another location in the settlement. And then we wanted to know a little bit longer after the intervention how the refugee women were doing. And so again, we had an assessment 3 months after the SH+ sessions concluded. And again, we lost some women, but again, not too many women. I'm glad that we were able to trace quite a few, a very large percentage of the women in the study. So that is the kind of study we did, a cluster randomized trial. And these are the results. So in the first column, you can see which kind of questions we asked. So there are 3 columns, one on the left, one on the middle, one on the right. The column in the left is the kinds of questions we asked. And where it says immediate, that column reflects the size of the effect immediately after SH+ was finished. And where it says 3 months, I have noted the effects after the 3 months. And when I say effect, what I mean is the difference between the treatment group and the control group. So both groups improved, but this is a direct comparison between improvements in the treatment group compared to the control group. And I think the pattern is actually quite clear. What we see is from 8 out of the 9 questionnaires that we used, we see medium effect sizes. And those are, for the research heads under us, those are Cohen's effect sizes. And everything that's above 0.3, I've listed as high. But usually these effect sizes in the range of 0.6, 0.7. So moving towards the large effect sizes. And what we see after 3 months is that there is a reduction in those effect sizes, but that for most of the outcomes that we included, those effects do remain, but they become smaller. And we still find that they are meaningful effects. So for our primary outcome, the outcome that we were mainly interested in, the one on the top, psychological distress, we actually found the smallest effect size at 3 months. And for the other secondary outcomes, we found slightly higher effect sizes after 3 months, but definitely reduced. So less the 0.6, 0.7 range, and now more the 0.3, 0.4 range. The biggest effects that we found were actually for anger. I think I'll stop there. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
This is.
Sorry, Peter. I have one
You
more
go
slide.
on. You have one more.
Yes.
You go ahead.
So
go ahead.
I want to be too quick. I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Just in terms of interpretation, what we found is that SH Plus is feasible to implement. It was popular with participants. Yeah, 83% of the participants were there on average. We found consistently larger improvements in the SH Plus participants than in the control participants, the enhanced usual care participants. And I think overall, if you look at the effect sizes, they're meaningful. They're not as large as you see in more higher intensity psychological treatments that focus on mental disorders, but they are meaningful and they compare quite well with other kinds of psychoeducational courses, for example, in high-income countries with at-risk populations, like the Coping with Depression course, which I think has a meta-analysis effect size of 0.28. The effects do decrease over time. I think it's important to think about why that is the case and how we can make sure that that does not happen. One thing we can think about maybe is to do booster sessions after the 5 sessions to remind people of their skills and lessons learned. But it may also be, and that's actually my personal interpretation, what we see in our study is very similar to what we see in evaluations of other psychological therapies. If you look at systematic reviews of psychological therapies in humanitarian settings, you see that the effect sizes actually for all of those, also for the psychotherapies that are more focused and higher intensity, drop very quickly. And I think that is an important reminder to us that we may want to integrate psychological and psychosocial interventions into interventions that focus on other kinds of things that make stress come back, like poverty and gender-based violence. But overall, I think the findings seem to show that this is a promising intervention as a first-line intervention for everybody, as a universal intervention. Now I'm really finished. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Wietse. That was really great, and I think it is quite impressive. I see already comments in the chat box. Samrat Ghane from the Netherlands says that he thinks it's very impressive, and I can only agree. I mean, having been somewhat involved in the research as well with Wietse, is that it is really challenging to do this kind of top-notch research in very low resource settings. So I think I'm really excited by what you presented. Let us go to the questions now. We have, I think we take around 10 to 20 minutes for questions. So we'll go a little bit over the time. So we will stop like 20, 25 minutes from now. Now, if you still have more questions, please add them in the chat box and we will channel them to the presenters. And I looked at them and I tried to order the questions a little bit. And I would like to start with a question from Maki Kato, who I think is with Centers for Victims of Trauma in CVT, Center Victim of Torture and Trauma in Ethiopia, who asks a very practical question. Like, the session is 2 hours, but how much of the session is actually a pre-recorded audio as opposed to open discussion? And that's one question. And the second question she has is, how many facilitators are actually involved in each session? Do you have 1, 2, 3? And the last question is, how much flexibility does the format offer for facilitators? Can they include additional exercises, for example? So I would like to start with Safina here and then go on to Ken. So Safina, could you tell us a little bit, if you have a session of 2 hours, how much of that is actually the pre-recorded audio, how much is discussion or exercise?
Thank you very much, moderator. Almost all of the session is pre-recorded, apart from a few areas where the facilitator has to only pause and read out a question. Or if the facilitator sees that the group does not understand the question well, or if the group shows signs that they are not understanding the question, then the facilitator can again pause to read out the question. But 98% of the session is pre-recorded.
Right. How many facilitators do you have per session?
Every session has a facilitator and a co-facilitator. So the major role of a facilitator is to sit and run the audio, pause where necessary, then follow up with the manual and read out discussion questions to the group. Meanwhile, the co-facilitator handles cases like any distressed participants who want to share out a story or who feel they have something private to discuss. So the co-facilitator handles such.
Right.
Yeah.
And how much flexibility does a facilitator have? Can you include different exercises or do things differently?
The facilitator is not allowed to bring in other exercises. We so much use the exercises in the audio because the audio has a lot of exercises, and where the group is bored, at least in every 10 to 15 minutes of the audio, there's somewhere the group can stretch. And whoever feels like going out, maybe to stretch from out or go for a call, or feels like going out, is really free to do so. We don't force people. We don't really tell people that they have to do this. No. So we follow the audios. Yeah.
Great, great. So thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Ken. Maybe you want to add something to what Safina already mentioned?
Yeah, thanks, Peter, and thanks, Safina. Yeah, just to add a couple little things about why it is like this, I suppose. So it has been designed to be mostly recorded. And the major reason for this is really to try and increase scalability, so that instead of having to train people in many different techniques, if we can train people to make a group to 30 people and to facilitate that well, then hopefully we'll be able to reach many more people. And then we can keep the people that we've then trained in an individual psychotherapy or an individual scalable intervention to then help anybody who needs more help after doing something like Self-Help Plus. So the idea is that by making it this way, we can reach more people. And also importantly, we can keep fidelity. So we don't recommend that other things are added. When facilitators have done this before in other settings, the groups have got very long. Now, obviously, if you're working in a certain area and aspects of it need to be adapted for that community, that's a different thing. But adding or subtracting parts, we don't recommend. The other thing is that I suppose, having done the research, we know that the package works and that this is what gives the results that Wietse presented. So those are some of the reasons why it's structured in this way.
Great. Thank you very much for this clarification, and that is very helpful, Ken. Now, there are some more questions actually about the practical rollout. For example, there is a question from Dorothy Namara, who is with Humanity and Inclusion in Arua as well. So she works with the same population actually, who asks whether this intervention gives room to train community focal persons to do the intervention in order to be able to scale up. So how easy is it to train, let's say, local community members then continue the intervention? Perhaps Ken, and can you start saying something? We move to Safina.
Sure, of course. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think this is somewhere where we're learning at WHO. So we did the trials in Rhino Camp, and we've got a lot of experience because, as Wietse said, we were piloting, we were doing small groups. Then Safina and the team of facilitators were excellent in doing many groups at once. But these are all under research conditions, obviously. So then I think, is that possible? I think my answer would be yes, I think it is possible. How we do that will be something I think we learn now as we start scaling up and as we start training others. So one thing I think as we start using the Juba Arabic version is that we can start learning some of this. We can start seeing, how do we train community focal people? What is the level of support that people need to deliver this? So I don't have a direct answer for this just yet, but I think it's something that we will learn as we start working with organizations to scale up.
Yeah. Safina, would you like to add something? Is it possible to use community members from the refugee community as facilitators? How easy is it?
Yeah, it's possible. Because learning to facilitate is not that hard, and like I said, Self-Help Plus is majorly in the audio, so a facilitator does not have so much to do. So it's possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Great, thank you. Then there are some other questions around the training, because the facilitators have actually quite a role. It's quite an easy task, but still, how much training do the facilitators need? And then also, which is a question from Ruma Gondaker, if I pronounce that well, from Bangladesh, who asks also about what kind of training is needed for supervisors or for people who want to actually implement this kind of interventions within their programs. So maybe any of you three can maybe answer. Maybe Ken is the most logical person to answer the question around how much training time is needed for the facilitators as well as for supervisors or program managers.
Okay, thanks. So I've just seen Witze's comment as well in the chat, just saying that one of the facilitators from the research was South Sudanese refugee, and all facilitators were general community members without a mental health training background. So there's some more information about the training that was needed. In terms of the supervision and training, so at the minute we have a training that is around 5 days face-to-face training with, prior to that, some listening to the course. So the training, I think probably in reality maybe takes somewhere between 5 to 7 days. Then after that basic training, and that training is very much based around how do you implement Self-Help Plus, how do you run a group. A lot of it is listening to the audio, so you get familiar with the course itself. Then after this initial training, there then is a period where people would then run a practice group or something, or they would deliver something, they would get more familiar with the materials. And I think after that period, then people seem to be very confident with running it after that. In terms of supervision, we tend to find that is similar to other interventions and other MHPSS interventions, but I'd suggest it takes less time, because a lot of once people are running the groups and they're familiar with running the groups, there's less technical supervision, we could say. And I suppose the only supervision I think that we experienced during the research was more around safety, so more around risk issues, general things like issues like that might come up, people needing other support. And the whole course is based around the idea of self-help. So even if an issue around people needing access to other services comes up, then we might try and direct people to supports within their community or in their area where they can get help. So I suppose the audio also reduces the need for ongoing training or revision of skills.
Great, thank you very much. Does any of the others want to add here? Otherwise, we go to the next question. This is from Juma Kalyagera, who asks how we identify clients who could benefit from the session. So what kind of screening tools do you have before you actually add people to the group? So I thought maybe Wietse can say something, and then Safina after that.
Sure, yeah. So I should start out with saying that we used screening as part of the research study. And what we did in the study does not have to necessarily be the only way in which you can implement SH+, of course. We also had to make some choices that were helpful for a study compared to a real world implementation context. We used a screener called the Kessler 6, which asked 6 questions that assessed psychological distress quite broadly, because we felt that reflects the aim of SH Plus very well. As Ken said, it's a transdiagnostic intervention that's not aimed at treating a particular mental disorder per se, but that aims to reduce distress, whether you have a particular mental disorder or not, also for people that are distressed but that don't meet the formal criteria for a mental disorder also. But what we found, if we use the Kessler 6 and a moderate distress cutoff, is that more than 99% of the women actually were included. So in a setting like Rhino Camp, it seems that almost all women will qualify. We have been thinking that it will probably be good to continue the screening, because it can help you as part of the monitoring and evaluation to see if there are changes in distress after the intervention is finished.
Right, right. Safina, would you like to say a little bit about how clients enter the groups? Because what I understand from Wietse is actually most women could benefit from the session. So how did that go in practice?
Yeah, I think Wietse said it all. They undergo screening, and this we used the research team who underwent training on how to also screen. So the intervention team basically came to start administering the course. So the research team recruits participants, and the facilitators simply come and identify the participants to start the course.
Great. Yeah, there are a lot of other questions around the use of Self-Help Plus in other groups. So I would like to go to Ken in the first place, and then maybe the others can also react. So maybe you can explain a little bit about the ongoing efforts from the WHO to do research around Self-Help Plus, because that is a question that other people have asked. Is WHO planning to do research around the Rohingya crisis, for example, or in other locations? And perhaps, Ken, you can also tell a little bit again about which versions of Self-Help Plus are now available for the audience and how people could get it. Over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Sure. Okay, I'll talk through a little bit about this. I realized when some of the questions were coming up that I'd forgotten to say in my presentation that Self-Help Plus was developed for adults. So it's up to 2 hours long. We're looking at ways to maybe shorten those sessions because we realize that's a little bit long. But yeah, it's for adults. So we're talking about people over the age of 18, and that's who was involved in the research. We have a bit of an approach here where what we're doing with the scalable psychological interventions is releasing them as generic versions, i.e. publicly releasing them like we've done with PM+, once we have 2 positive research trials. And the reason we do this is to make sure that the interventions work before they get used very, very widely, and also to make sure they're not doing any harm. So we have this trial that Wietse spoke about, which was with South Sudanese women. Wietse is also leading another trial, this time with South Sudanese men. So that will be a second research trial on Self-Help Plus, following a similar format, and we'll be looking to see what adaptations we need to make for men. But on top of that, we also have a large research project ongoing in Europe called Redefine. And that is 2 large randomized controlled trials, one in Turkey with Syrian refugees primarily, and one in 5 other European countries with multiple refugee and asylum seeker groups. Now, the aim of this trial is to look at whether Self-Help Plus works as a prevention intervention. So we find refugees and then recruit refugees into the trial who are experiencing high levels of stress but have not yet got the symptoms to be diagnosable with a mental disorder. So we do a screening questionnaire, and we also interview them to find out if they meet criteria for a mental disorder. And then we follow them up in 6 months' time or so to see how they're getting on. So that's the other research that we've got underway. Based on some of these results, we will then be in a position to think about how and when we release Self-Help Plus more generally. Now, so what this means is, in terms of the packages that we have available, the package we have available for use is this one we're talking about, the Juba Arabic version. So at the minute, we're welcoming the use of Self-Help Plus in South Sudan and in associated countries where there may be Juba Arabic speaking refugees. Now, while it's only been tested with women, we don't have any concerns about it being used with men, and we're following up with more research on that. Like I said, it was developed for adults, so we wouldn't recommend it being used with people under the age of 18, but we also similarly can't see any problems, particularly with older adolescents, though they might find it a bit boring. So I suppose that's where we're at in terms of the packages and the releases.
Yeah. Now, if participants in the webinar are actually working in settings with South Sudanese people, and they are interested to explore it, how can they get more information about Self-Help Plus for South Sudanese people?
If they contact me directly, send an email, then we can arrange for that. What I'll do, I'll into the chat window now. I'll just type my email so that then everybody has it.
Perfect. Now we are slowly running out of time, so I will do a few more questions and then we end. There is one question from Dr. Guatirera Javangwe, who asks what the experiences are with the program fidelity. So maybe Wietse can say something, because I think you may have looked at that. So how was the fidelity to the model in the research that you did?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we did look at that. It's actually Ken who looked at that data in the most detail. Yeah, so I'll let Ken answer that.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Wietse. Yeah, it's a funny question to answer, because the fact that it's audio recorded means that that's the fidelity. That as long as it gets played, then that's what we're counting as fidelity. So we did checks where we asked the facilitators to complete forms, recording that everything had gone well, everything had been played, and then we had supervisors do spot checks on, I think it was about 10% of the sessions. And we found, I can't remember the exact figures, but we found very, very few instances where things had gone wrong. And they were tiny mistakes. Like, for example, the facilitator forgot to press play again, so there was a bit of a pause or something like that. So we'd say that the fidelity was very good. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not sure I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, I said there that we would say that the fidelity was very good because of the pre-recording.
Right.
Can you hear me?
A related question is from Samrat Ghane from the Netherlands, who actually asks whether you have information about whether the participants keep using the skills they've learned also in the follow-up period. Do you have any information, any of you three, about whether people continue using the skills?
Yeah, we did ask about that in the qualitative process evaluation that we did not too long after the intervention completed. So if your question is did they use it after a year, then we don't know. But in the few months after the intervention, a lot of people said, yes, we continue to use the skills. And we also are teaching the skills to others in our environment.
Yeah. And I'm going to the last question now, because I think we have to end the webinar for time. And that is a question from Patrick Nyango from TPO Uganda. And I rephrase it a little bit. He would like to know the difference of Self-Help Plus with other existing social support mechanisms like livelihoods and education or other skills development that are designed to contribute to the same outcome. So what is the added value, the difference of Self-Help Plus compared to other more broad psychosocial intervention activities that we already know? Maybe Ken or Wietse could.
Yeah, I can answer that and then maybe hand over to Wietse as well. Can you hear me okay, Peter?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd say the difference, or maybe a potential difference, is that it's a psychological intervention aiming primarily at reducing distress and increasing functioning. So it might have a slightly different lens or a slightly different approach to other livelihoods or social support interventions. That said, so we would class it in the same way as we would think about other psychological interventions such as PM Plus and how they are different to other existing psychosocial interventions. That said, I think one of the things I'm excited about with Self-Help Plus is how it could be integrated into those existing packages. Because it's audio delivered, because it takes maybe less training or less skills or less being able to give the psychological information yourself, I think it would be a really good candidate to then integrate into a livelihoods program. So for example, for 5 weeks during a livelihoods program, people attend the Self-Help Plus sessions. So I think that's one of the nice things about it, is that it could be flexibly added to existing programs.
Perfect. Now, then finally, there are some people, including Beth Kutab, who asks about this very presentation. So whether participants can get a copy of the PowerPoint, and that I will post to the presenters. But what I can say is that the webinar has been recorded and will be posted on YouTube. And perhaps one of the MHPSS.net facilitators can come in, but I think you will be able to find the link on MHPSS.net. Marcio, can you answer that question about the video link? And Marcio? I don't hear him, but then just trust me, you will be able to get the link to review the program. PowerPoint presentations from Ken and from Wietse, I propose that if people want to have them, they write individually to the authors with the request. And Ken has written his email address in the chat box, and perhaps Wietse and Safina can also do that. So if people have follow-up questions, they can read. Yeah, this is about it. I would like to thank the 3 presenters a lot. It was great hearing your experience, each looking at Self-Help Plus from a different angle, but together actually giving a very comprehensive presentation. So thanks, Safina, Ken, and Wietse.
Peter,
and
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Super.
Yes, Marcio is there. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, guys. Today we also had no connection issues from our side as well. The webinar has been recorded and it will be posted the next few hours or up to tomorrow. Should be at our MHPSS.net site, YouTube link as well. Peter, thank you so much. You have made an amazing facilitation. I think we're going to invite you every time for all the webinars from now. And I also thank everyone, the other presenters too, and the participation of the whole group that has been part of this very interesting webinar.
Okay, thank you all then. See you next webinar. See you somewhere, somehow. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.